Hey guys, it's Quickie Baby, and I cannot find the time to keep up with the developments on the War Thunder closed beta. Ground Forces test server at the moment. This is test server 4, and there are so many new tanks, it kind of makes all the previous test server versions look really stupid. The smallest tanks we have are the T-34-85 and the Su-85M. Then we see something that a lot of you will love, one of the most popular tanks around, the T-44. We have a return of the IS-2. However, there is a 1944 modification with a 122mm cannon. Then we have an Su-100, an ISU-122, and an ISU-122S. From the German side, we officially have the Panther in the game, and boy does it look beautiful. We have a Jagdpanther as well, a Ferdinand, and a stock Tiger II, and a Tiger II with the Henschel turret. I've played all of these tanks and I will have gameplay for you soon. This video is just going to be to get you up to date with the stats of the tanks so you can sort of keep in touch with the development of the game. These test server new tanks videos are just so you can get a feel for the stats, because I really feel that for me it helps me understand the game as it develops, and then I can keep in mind what the different capabilities are of the tanks. I have got some really fun gameplay in a Panther already, in a T-44, and also the Soviet tank destroyers. I will be placing gameplay videos for all of them. Also, I've got some exciting footage of an IS-2, which I can show you as well. But anyway, let's take a look at the tech trees. So there are two reserve tanks that basically no one is ever going to play. We have a stock Tiger II, so to say, which has a very dangerous 88mm. With its standard ammunition, it has 215mm of penetration up close, and at 1000 meters it still has 178. This tank can fire APCR shells, which means it can basically push through anything up close with 245mm, and 217 at 500 and 195 at 1000. Nearly by 3 kilograms, which means that when you do penetrate the target, you're going to be doing less overall damage with the APCR than the AP. However, if you do need that extra clout, then you do have it available when you have this thing fully upgraded. I will mention that upgrading the tanks in this version of the test server is very hard. Takes a long time, and so I won't really have an opportunity to test the upgraded ammunition types. So with regards to the rest of the stats on this tank, it is a very heavy tank at 67 tons. It has 700 brake horsepower, which is rather underwhelming given the weight, but its max speed limit is 40 kilometers an hour. Now its turret rotation speed is 12 degrees, it has 6 degrees of gun depression and 17 elevation. Its frontal hull armor is excellent at 150, but as this is the stock Tiger II, its turret is the weak point with only 100mm of armor on the turret. What this means is that if you see one of these Tiger IIs without the Henschel turret, you should just nail it in the turret. You're generally going to kill it. I've had good success also firing at the lower plate of these tanks, with tanks such as the Panther, and I will be showing that in the gameplay videos. Now here's the Tiger II with the Henschel turret. It increases the turret armor by 80mm, which means that it's no longer a truly viable option to use to engage a Tiger II. It has the same 88mm and it's just truly devastating. It's nearly impossible to penetrate a Tiger II frontally with many of the tanks on the test server at the moment, but if one does go in from, say, a high caliber tank, you're still very, very, very dead. There is a Panther on this test server as well. It's absolutely beautiful, fantastic tank to play. It has the same engine as a Tiger at 700 brake horsepower. However, because it only weighs 42 tons, it means that this thing can shift. Its max speed limit is 55 kilometers an hour, which really allows it to progress around the battlefield. It does have 6 degrees of gun depression. Its turret traverse is very different to other war simulation games, at 12 degrees a second, which means that you shouldn't expect to quickly re-engage targets that may be flanking you without turning your tracks as well. Now the hull armor at the front is 80mm, which is enough to bounce many tanks, such as the T-44, very reliably. However, you've only got 40 at the side and 40 at the rear, which means that if you do get hit in the side of the rear, you're basically dead. Now, its turret armor is 100 at the front, 45 at the side, and 45 at the rear. So your turret has the same kind of mechanics that your hull armor does. Now, the armor penetration on this tank is fantastic. 158 up close, deviating to 121 at 1000 meters. And when you do upgrade the ammunition, you have 218 up close and 145 at 1000. However, you do lose some of the weight of the projectile, 2 kilograms worth, which means that you'll be doing less damage overall. Must mention that that is a 75mm cannon. However, interestingly, I have one-hit just as many tanks using the 75mm as I have using the 88 on the Tiger. So it feels like having that 75mm isn't so much of a downside compared to an 88 than you might thought it would be. Now we're looking at the Jagdpanther. It's very similar to the Panther as you might expect, just without the turret. However, it has fantastic gun depression at 10 degrees. This means is that you can quite often find slopes where you can angle the armor on the upper plate, which really allows you to weather a lot of damage. It's got slightly less top speed limit at 49 kilometers an hour. However, this thing does get an 88mm, which does have superior penetration characteristics at all ranges compared to the Panther. Obviously, losing that turret is a disadvantage in many situations, but the Jagdpanther is a very dangerous tank, and I do like it quite a lot. Next, we're looking at the Ferdinand. Its engine power is pathetic at 530, and it weighs a lot at 65 tons. However, its top speed limit downslope is great at 40. It has 8 degrees of gun depression rather than 10, as on the Jagdpanther. However, its hull armor is a mighty 200mm at the front, 80 at the side, and 80 at the rear. So boy, can this thing take a punishment. I've had great success, however, penetrating these things in the lower plate. Generally, that causes engine damage, as I'll be showing you in some of the gameplay. This thing gets the same 88 as the Jagdpanther, which is more than enough to one-hit any tank in the game most of the time, as long as you hit them flush. Now we're going to have a quick look at the Russian tanks, or Soviet tanks. We know all about the T-34-85 from the previous version, so I'm going to skip over that. Let's look at the T-44. Now this thing weighs just over 31 tons, and it has a 500 brake horsepower engine, which means it's very highly mobile. Its top speed limit is 49 kilometers an hour. Its turret rotation speed is one of the best at 15 degrees. However, the tank's gun depression is rather underwhelming at 5 degrees, compared to, for example, the German vehicles, which have slightly more. Now the hull armor at the front is 90, the side is 75, and the rear is 45, which means that frontally, because of the very well-angled frontal armor, this thing can pull off quite a lot of bounces. The turret armor at the front is 120, which is also rather fantastic. The thing that lets this tank down is that it does have an 85mm. Now this 85mm only has 113mm of penetration up close, deviating to 97 at range, so it doesn't really lose much of its penetration. What that really means is that you need to hit the side and the rear of your targets, otherwise you're really not going to penetrate them in this iteration of the test. This ammunition, however, is upgradable. These APCR shells, although you do lose nearly 4 kilograms on the weight of the projectile, do have 185mm of penetration up close. And at 500 meters, they've still got 140. The AP-HE ammo is also a very viable option for just taking out your enemies quickly if you're able to penetrate them in the side or the rear. I've been really liking the T-44. It feels like the true medium of this iteration of the test. You really can use your maneuverability to just get better positions than your opponents. However, if this tank does end up in a frontal engagement with a tank that's very heavily armored, it just simply can't penetrate them. Next, we're looking at the IS-2, which in this version of the test server has a 122mm cannon. Its rate of fire is really bad. However, if you do hit the target, it absolutely nails them. You have 183mm of penetration up close, ranging to 152 at 1,000 meters, which can be increased slightly with the AP-HE-BC rounds. And it's scary to think that the projectile mass of these shells is 25 kilograms, like firing a small child. What that means is that generally, if you hit the opponent with your child-sized object, they are going to die. The maneuverability of this tank is a lot better than the Germans, as an example, with 520 hit brake horsepower, but it weighs just shy of 44 tons. It means that it can use its 38 kilometer an hour top speed limit quite reliably. This tank has got 5 degrees of gun depression, which can be a limiting factor, so you're going to have to think about your positioning relative to your opponent. Now the hull armor is not as good as the Germans, but it's still really good. 120 at the front, 90 at the side, and 60 at the rear. And its turret armor is 100 all around. The lower plate is quite a viable option, as you can see. And obviously if you have the side, well, generally in War Thunder, in the closed beta ground forces, if you have the side of any tank, and you shoot it, and you hit it, generally dies, maybe 75% of the time. Compared to the German heavies, this is basically a slightly more mobile, harder hitting tank, but its rate of fire is worse. But in the kind of game where it's usually one shot, one kill, as long as you do penetrate with your IS-2, you're going to be in a very strong position. Next we'll look at some of the tank destroyers. We've got an Su-85, which uses an 85mm. We've got an Su-100, which uses 100mm. The chassis of these two tanks are the same. I am having lots of fun with the Su-100. I feel that it's a real sweet spot. This 100mm has got more than enough penetration to reliably penetrate its targets from the side or the rear easily, and it can also give quite a few tanks a run for its money frontally with 175mm of penetration up close and still 145 at 1,000 meters. Now this tank is highly mobile. It weighs 31 tons and it's got 500 brake horsepower and its max speed is 57 kilometers an hour. This might very well be my favorite tank on the test server at the moment. You fire a shot, confirm your kill, and you move on quickly and try and find your next position. It's a wonderful tank, and I'm going to be showing you some gameplay with it soon. Next, we're looking at the ISU-122. This thing has that deadly 122mm cannon like the IS-2 has, which is simply devastating if it goes through its targets. This tank is not badly armored with 90 at the front and the side. Means if you do angle your armor between your shots, you do have quite a good chance to bounce. The tank has horrific gun depression though, and it's the real downside to it. 3 degrees is generally not enough to really put yourself in effective positions. You generally have to expose far too much of your tank. Also, because the tank is so tall and the gun is mounted directly in the center, when you're going over slopes, firstly you have to expose a hell of a lot of it because your gun can only point slightly down. But also the enemies will be able to penetrate you here before you can see them, and that's really not very good for you. Still, with 520 brake horsepower and 45 tons, this thing isn't that immobile. It's not as bad as the Ferdinand, but it's not nearly as heavily armored as the Ferdinand. It's not as flexible as the Ferdinand, but when it hits, boy does this thing hurt. Anyway guys, those are all of the new tanks in the test server 4, so to say, the 4th iteration of the test server. My favorites would have to be the SU-100 and the Panther. I really love this 75mm. However, I also do like the T-44, and it is quite funny to be so derpy with 122mm in the IS-2. I have gameplay coming soon. It's just so hard to give you guys high quality videos as quickly as these test servers do come out. So apologies if I've been slacking a little bit. Hopefully you'll be happy with the gameplay I'm going to be releasing over the next few days, and you'll have a well-rounded opinion on them. Anyway guys, if you've enjoyed this video, please consider rating it down below and let me know about what you think about all the tanks in the comments. Which one do you think is going to be your favorite if you were able to play it? Do any of the stats of the tanks surprise you? I'd be really interested to know what you think. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.